Hey everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk a bit about Link and its outlook now that staking is live. I want to look at some of our models and what they think of Link's recent price action. So, if you've been following Link, you're probably aware that staking went live for Link, and this is a pretty big milestone. Staking is something that the community had wanted for Link for a very long time, and it finally happened, or at least the first iteration of Link staking happened, a little bit ago as I record this. It's December 6th that had gone live. A bunch of people, staked their tokens, etc. But if you look at Link's price action ever since that event, you'll notice it has not been especially bullish, right? Even before staking ended up going live, we really saw this big drawdown forming where Link kind of found a local top at 7.8 and now it's trading all the way down at 6.44. So was staking a sell the news type of event? Is it likely that Link might be going further down from here after that staking announcement? Because that tends to happen when you get these catalysts that seem like they should be bullish on their face, like staking. Usually what you'll see is a rally into that event, which, that's what we saw, this massive rally going into right around when that event happened. Then oftentimes with those telegraphed events, those things that everyone knows are coming, once the event actually happens, people sell it. So that's why, you hear the buy the rumor, sell the news is a saying. And the idea is that the market tends to pump in advance of these kind of bullish events and then actually sell off after them. It seems like that might be happening here. And one of the things that we can look at that I think kind of reinforces this likelihood that we are seeing a sell the news reaction from Link. So we look at the Link ETH valuation. So this is basically the value of Link denominated in Ethereum. So how many ETH is one Link worth, basically. So when this is moving up, that means that Link is outperforming Ethereum. This is moving down, it means that Ethereum is outperforming Link. So if we go ahead and we zoom in on recent price action, you'll notice, just look at this massive number of red candles that we're seeing here. If we just measure it, we've seen now 13 days in a row where Link has underperformed ETH, where ETH has outperformed Link. And so what this suggests then is it suggests that this is not just a broader market move. If ETH is kind of the big altcoin in the space, then if the bigger altcoin has been outperforming Link all these times, it's not that just the entire market is selling off necessarily that's leading to this. It seems to be that Link is bleeding out, even just comparison to another big crypto asset like Ethereum. And so this just reinforces to me the idea that what we are seeing in Link's price action here is a more kind of definitive sell the news type of reaction. And then what we're going to be looking for is, okay, well, where might we find a bottom? Now, of course, short-term predictions are always, highly speculative and should be taken with a massive grain of salt. But you will notice that Link has been hanging out in this kind of general range for a very long time so far. I'm going to put some horizontal lines here to kind of space it out, but more or less in this kind of range. And then within that kind of smaller ranges within that bigger range. So it would not shock me at all if this sell the news, especially if the broader market remains relatively bearish or nothing really bullish happens to push the broader market up. If Link kind of finds its way back down to the lower end of this range coming off of that event. Because again, that was the big bullish catalyst. Now, except for just kind of more organic price action, there's nothing that's external that's likely to boost price like we saw leading into staking. So that's just kind of a short-term thing that I'm watching with Link. I think for now, most likely we're just going to stay in this price range that we've been in all the way since May. Unless there's some extreme bullish or bearish thing that happens in the market, I think we're just going to stay kind of stuck down here. But of course, what that means for people who like Link or who maybe want to acquire more, this could be forming into a nice accumulation zone before some kind of movement. Now, again, we don't know if that movement's going to be to the upside, could be the downside. But certainly this is a place where a lot of Link is changing hands between different individuals, and that can set the stage for bullish action in the future, although we're going to have to wait and see if that happens. All right, so let's go ahead and flip over to some of our models that we have here on the channel and get an idea of what they're looking at for Link. So here we're looking at the upside downside potential indicator for Link, the UDPI. So if you're not familiar, this is an indicator that quantifies risk in a given asset. This is the Link price action over time, and it's color coded to the UDPI level. Looking at the long-term version of the model that cares about moves that play out over months to multiple months, more long-term focus that it has on risk. And you see it does a great job across Link's history of quantifying these high-risk zones and these low-risk zones as well. And so in this range, kind of similar to what I was just talking about, it's identifying this range as not being too dissimilar from this range back here. And we can see this if we just look at it on the raw levels. So white is the raw UDPI level across time, yellow is the Link's price in the background there. And what you'll see is that the way that the UDPI is acting here, it's not totally dissimilar for how it acted back here, right? You know, we're kind of in the same general ballpark, just kind of bouncing around, which also kind of feeds into that possibility of this being a general accumulation zone. Now, obviously, this time, you know, we saw what came after that. You know, the hope would be that that would happen again. We don't know, right? But if we can hold this range, and then if broader conditions can get more favorable, you know, if it looks like we're going to avoid a massive stock market crash, if there are no more dominoes that fall following FTX to crash the crypto markets, if things get a little more bullish, you know, this could be the kind of setting in that stage for the next, you know, big move up if the rest of the crypto market experiences that. As I've said before, though, my base case is that that's not going to happen anytime, especially soon. We might get some volatility. We might break out of this range one way to the other, but then kind of still be range bound for a while. I think that the fallout from FTX is going to last a while to filter through. Not necessarily that's going to pull price down further, but it might just mean that the crypto space remains kind of subdued, that there's not a lot of new interest in the crypto space for a while until that's kind of faded more from memory. But, you know, for the long-term investor, that doesn't really matter that much, right? It's really more of a question of, is this generally speaking a value zone? And that's what the long-term UDPI is suggesting based on what it's seen from Link in the past, that this is a place where in the long term, there's more upside potential that's realistic than downside. Though you will note that there is still downside potential that's realistic here. So even though we've just been in this range, the model is actually pricing in the possibility of further downside here, right? You know, we're in still the same general range we were all the way back here, you know, in May going into June, but yet you'll notice the UDPI is higher here than here, which just suggests that it thinks now that this may not be offering as strong of support or as, you know, likely to be a bottom as it was back here at this local bottom that we put in there. So time will tell if this was the bottom, but for now, the model thinks that there is more upside than downside that's realistic, but it is saying that there's a possibility of this downside. So of course, none of this is financial advice. You should make your own decisions of how to navigate this, but that's how I'm currently reading what the UDPI is saying. And we can look also at the short-term UDPI just to get a sense of where we might be going in the shorter term. And what we can see here as well is that we've kind of been in this range on the short-term UDPI ever since May, more or less, with one breakout here. You know, coming above it, more or less, we've kind of been ranging between -1 and down to around -4. We just went up and tapped -1 again here. And now, lo and behold, we're rolling over, just like we've been doing many times in the past. You know, this is the fourth time, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 that we've bounced off of -1. So for us to come down the short-term UDPI back down to this general level would not surprise me, which might suggest that there is still more downside that's realistic from here before we do that, which would coincide with what we've been talking about narratively, with this being kind of a sell the news reaction from staking going live. And then also, you know, what we're seeing, confluence with it, you know, looking to bleed against something like Ethereum, that this does seem to be Link kind of giving up some ground from those gains that it made going into the staking announcement. So short term, that might be one possibility. Now, of course, short term predictions are always very, you know, speculative and questionable, and I could be 100% wrong. We could go shooting out to the upside, but my base case is that that's not especially likely. And even if we do go to the upside, I still expect us more long term to be range bound. Even if that range kind of maybe moves up a bit or maybe moves down a bit, one way or the other, I don't think we're going to be putting in new all-time highs for a while yet, until the broader markets really recover, till some of that fallout and contagion from FTX really starts to die out. I know that's not a fun thing to think about, but it's just the unfortunate reality we live in, that when big events like that happen, things are not going to recover immediately. And so even though Link had nothing to do with FTX, it's kind of guilt by association. Because it is a crypto asset, then everyone's looking at crypto more skeptically because of FTX, you know, not really necessarily distinguishing like they perhaps should, you know, that obviously Link is an asset that had nothing to do with any of that situation. So the final model I wanted to look at in this video was the MBI, because Link is starting to put in some additional interesting behavior here that also suggests to me that we might be entering into what could be a long-term accumulation zone, similar to something like we saw back here. And so what I've talked about the MBI before, it's a momentum indicator. So positive values mean positive momentum bias. That means that moves to the upside are the prevailing, or upside moves are the prevailing force, and that moves to the downside tends to get bought up quickly to shoot back up. And then negative values are a negative momentum bias. That tends to be what happens in these bearish conditions where it really drags price down. And what I've talked about many times in the past, and this happens with all the assets that I've looked at with the MBI, we have this across many different assets. When you go into a bear market, you see this exact kind of behavior where you go into the deep red, you kind of poke your head back up above zero, you'll kind of start oscillating, you'll start going down deeper into the red, poke your head above zero in a relief rally, go back down to the red, poke your head up, get rejected again, go down even deeper. It's this general kind of behavior where you're going to be trying to reestablish positive momentum bias but continually failing, and then going kind of deeper and deeper into the red. But notably, after this very deep move on the MBI, in fact, the by far most negative value that we've gotten on the MBI for Link in this crash leading into the May lows, you'll notice that we started to kind of do this oscillation around zero behavior. And I've talked about this before. This is the kind of behavior that tends to start to happen in these accumulation zones, in these transitions between bearish conditions and bullish conditions. And so you can think of that as accumulation behavior, where momentum isn't really able to establish a bias for too long in any particular direction. It's kind of, goes to the upside, comes back down, goes to the upside, goes back down. A relatively neutral momentum. And that's exactly what you see in these accumulation type zones, where price kind of bounces around, but no particular type of momentum is able to gain dominance and really pull price up in the case of positive momentum bias, or pull price down in the case of negative. And so that's really what that accumulation is, and it tends to be in those transitions. You go kind of accumulation often, then into these bull runs, into these bear markets kind of after the big blow off top, and then down into the deep bear market, and then accumulation, which then sets the stage for the possibility of a future bull run. And so we're seeing that behavior again, and it's notable that we're starting to see this now because really ever since back in November, there was very little bullish to see in the MBI. It was just printing more and more telltale bearish signs all the way through to here. But now we're starting to see a different pattern start to play out, and we're actually starting to see this in other crypto assets as well. Link is not the only one to start painting this picture on the MBI, which might give us the sense that maybe we are starting to enter into accumulation zone. Doesn't mean we can't get more volatility or we couldn't break to the downside a bit further or not. And technically it doesn't mean we couldn't go into a deep next leg down. But just based on historical patterns, I think we need a pretty severe event for us to do that from here. I think we would need, us going into a recession, the stock market crashing off a cliff, that kind of thing to happen to really kind of break us out of this historical pattern. Because again, this has all been in the case where we've been in a broader bull market in macro conditions. We haven't seen, except for the March 2020 crash, which was, technically a very brief, bear market, recession, but then it was a very quick V-shaped recovery right out of it. We haven't really seen any severe recession like the 2008 financial crisis or the 2000, dot-com bubble burst. We haven't seen a stock market crash like that in the existence of crypto, let alone Link. So we don't know how it would behave. But short of something like that happening, I do think it's very plausible we're setting the base here, which might not necessarily break out to the upside anytime soon, but could eventually act as that base, which then launches us to the upside. So something that short-term, people with short-term horizons, that's not looking all that useful. It just might be more range-bound here. But for longer-term, investors, that might just be kind of a bullish signal. But again, with the caveats that this is all dependent on something like the stock market not crashing, which there's obviously no guarantee of. So of course, none of this is financial advice. I'll say that again. You should make your own decision, interpret these data as you will. But that's just what I'm kind of seeing in the cards potentially for Link. That this range that we're seeing here, whether or not this particular range holds or not, we're maybe starting to form the base of something, like back over here, or even you could say over here, might act as a launching pad for further moves. And so we would hope that this isn't just a bear flag, where we're coming down, we just kind of flag out for a while, then crash back down further. But the model suggests that it's very plausible this might not actually be that. This could actually be the possibility of an accumulation zone, which could set the stage for bullish action in the future. So that's something that I'm going to be watching. I'm going to be monitoring, obviously our different indicators for Link to see what they're telling as things develop. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter. A lot of updates, better indicators, and more over there.